So the theme of this retreat is embodying compassion, embodying compassion. And yes, there are obviously two words in that title. And it's interesting to think maybe which word we were most drawn to. You know, is it the word compassion or the word embodying? And much of what I will speak of today will be on this theme of compassion. But my intention is that it's also very linked to the theme of embodiment. Yeah, theme of embodiment. So we could all know that compassion may sound like a good idea. You know, somebody says, oh, be compassionate. I don't think many people are going to say, well, no, I don't want to do that. Or, you know, it's helpful to be kind to ourselves and others when we're struggling. But the question is, how do we move from something being a good idea to being something that we really live? And I think this sense of embodiment is very significant in that. And if we think of the different Buddhist traditions, in some traditions there's been very much an intentional cultivation of compassion. So people very much bring that to the foreground in the Theravadan practices. You get that around the the metta practices and the karuna practices. We'll have some flavor of those today. And Tibetan practices too, again, very much put compassion center stage. But there are some schools of Zen that are very much infused with compassion, even though their main practice would be mainly to sit, to be aware of whatever arises and passes. So they wouldn't be using phrases, may I be well, may I be happy. They wouldn't be bringing images to mind. They wouldn't be using that imaginative capacity. And so there will be a sense in that tradition that compassion is very much the fruit of our practice. So that by being deeply present with whatever arises from moment to moment to moment, there can be this shift of identity, this shift of the sense of who we are, that then expresses itself in compassionate action in the world. So we can have both of these in mind. Yeah. So compassion can be something that we can cultivate very intentionally. And we can also see it as a kind of fruit of all of our practice as we establish mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the breath, mindfulness of all that arises. Yeah. One of the fruits of that is this compassionate way of being. And as I mentioned the Zen tradition, I always love to bring to mind the famous ox herding pictures that describe the journey of Zen. And so there are, some sort of in the second half that are more about, realizing emptiness, realizing not self, a sense of, profound insight into the nature of all things. But what I love about that is that that's not the end of the ox herding pictures. The end of them, the final one, is called Return to the Marketplace. And so maybe that can also inform us today, that it's not about trying to create any particular sort of meditative experience as if they're valuable on their own. But those understandings that we get from meditation are really then expressed in how we are in the world, how we are with our family, with our friends, with our colleagues, neighbors, community, how our understanding expresses itself in our speech and action, lifestyle. So that kind of image of a whole life practice, I think, can really be a framework we can hold in mind as we're together today. So, I mentioned the embodiment, didn't I? Embodying compassion. So just to really come back to that, there are three ways to see the body that I find helpful. And the first of those is the body as a refuge. Yeah, the body as a refuge. So when we find ourselves worrying, preoccupied, distracted, agitated, all of the things that can come to us, the body can be such a helpful refuge, such a helpful place to return to. It's like something we can do that really helps. Yeah, something we can do that really helps. So I very deliberately use that word when we find ourselves worrying or preoccupied. If you notice that, it's not something we choose, is it? We don't choose to be, I really just want to spend the next 2 hours kind of churning over everything that might go wrong, or reliving last night's headlines in my mind again and again and again. But we find ourselves in this place where we feel perhaps less connected to our body, less connected to a sense of our own well-being or our own sense of perspective. We find our attention is narrowed and we're more chewing something over. And from there, the body is this real refuge. It's the place we can come back to. So we can feel our feet on the ground, the soles of the feet on the ground. We can feel our body on the chair, on the cushion. We can return to the breath. And doing that creates a steadiness, creates a sense of being grounded in the midst of the worries and preoccupations. Pushing them away is not so helpful, but grounding in the body can be really, really supportive. And more as I'm teaching this body as a refuge, I'm also aware of, the particular parts of the body that can feel most helpful. And bringing the attention down is so often supportive. Yeah. So rather than saying come back to the body in, as a general thing, we can think, well, how about the feet? How about the legs? How about the seat? The hands can also be good, Often if we're feeling more stirred up, we might notice there's a lot happening here, in the throat, in the chest, in the belly. This is, where the sort of strong emotions can be kind of felt and we're really sensing them in the body. But the feet, the legs, the seat, these can be very earthy, grounding places to let our attention rest. You might like the image of a tree. A tree with very deep roots is steady in the changing weather. And so too, when we can feel that feeling of being rooted in the ground, rooted in the earth, through our legs, through our feet, grounded, very supportive. So the body is a refuge. The body is also a barometer, we may say. So, the barometer measures pressure, doesn't it? Weather pressure, and gives us a sense of the changing weather patterns. And so too, our body is giving us so much sensitivity to what we're feeling, how something has touched us, how we're responding to things. So to really sense, it's like this in this moment, but to bring the attention into the body can really allow us to get in touch with some of the subtleties of how we're feeling. Somebody says something to us and we just notice a slight kind of pinching in the throat maybe. Or there's just a kind of shiver through the body. We notice there was something that was a little difficult to hear. When we're picking up these subtle clues, again, that really informs us in terms of our, compassionate speech. Because those subtle clues, basically means we're picking things up earlier. Yeah, picking things up earlier. There can be those times when we haven't really quite realized that we're getting very angry with somebody until we're really, kind of losing it with them. But if we pay attention to the body, there've been many clues kind of building up before that we can be with, we can listen to. and then find, different ways to respond to that. And of course, many ways we might respond. Sometimes, strongly, sometimes pausing, all kinds of things. But there's a choice there because we're more sensitive to the body. So the body is a refuge, a barometer for how we're feeling. And we could also say the body is a foundation. I'm love to come back to the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the ways of establishing mindfulness, and the body is the first. Yeah. Those of you who've done MBSR and MBCT, the body is what we begin with. It's always body scan in week 1. And the feeling in, both those more contemporary mindfulness approaches and in the Buddha's teaching, really is the body is the foundation upon which the other aspects rest. So I think it's very, interesting if what your experience is, but in my experience, it's actually really quite difficult to genuinely be mindful of thoughts without first having a sense of the body. Yeah, to be genuinely mindful of our feelings and emotions without also being grounded in this embodied presence. And, for today's theme, I think it's very supportive, essential even, for finding compassionate ways to be with ourselves, to be with others, to be in the world. This is really the ground from which we do that. Without the mindfulness of body, without embodying the sense of presence, then the compassion may simply be, a good idea. So it's the ground, it's the foundation from which we cultivate this quality of compassion. So as we turn more to this keyword of compassion that is going to be our companion for today, just to let you know, actually, I just realized as I was talking, it might be helpful for you to know, I'll probably talk for another 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have an opportunity to move the body a bit, and then we'll do a practice. It's nice to know sometimes, isn't it, where things are going. But this word, compassion, today I want to offer 2 things to bear in mind when we consider compassion. And those are connection and steadiness. Yeah? Connection and steadiness. So compassion is a quality of heart, of kindness, of friendliness that is engaged with what is sorrowful, what is painful, difficult, distressing. So compassion is very much how we turn towards the tough, painful aspects of life for ourselves and for others. And as we do that, those 2 words, steadiness and connection, are really significant. The connection is really moving away from a tendency we can all have at times to simply numb ourselves or to be, sort of endlessly distracting ourselves elsewhere. So we are able to connect with what is hard to bear in our own lives and in the lives of others. Yeah. And that connection has a certain relief to it, it's really hard to find the word for this actually, but it can feel meaningful, it can feel in touch, it can feel real, when we connect with those things. So compassion then, although we're turning towards the sorrowful, the painful, the distressing, it's not the same as those times when we can feel really lost in that. So it's different from being overwhelmed by it. It's not I just feeling so much, but it's being connected with it. Yeah. But alongside that connection, then there is this sense of steadiness. So steadiness again can come from the body, feeling the feet on the floor, feeling the body on the chair, feeling grounded. But there's a sense of being present in the midst of that which is difficult. I often bring to mind as a starting point the idea of a really good counselor. I don't know if you've ever had a really good counselor or therapist, because this is, part of what they do. If you had a counselor who you felt really didn't want to hear what was hard for you in your life, again, it's actually, it would be, well, it wouldn't be working, basically. It would be difficult, it would be painful. And we probably all had those times when we're wanting to share something hard and we feel that another person isn't really present or listening. And even if they can repeat back the words, yeah, I heard what you said. You said you'd had a really tough day. But it's like, yeah, but you heard, but you didn't hear. That makes sense, right? And that's painful, isn't it? That feeling when we're looking for a connection in the midst of sorrow and difficulty, and it's not there. But also this ideal counselor or good counselor is also steady within it. Again, it, in general wouldn't be so helpful if they just said, oh, I can't bear what you're telling me, and, walked out of the door, said, I'm sorry, I'm going to go, and actually we want to be accompanied with, connected with, but also the presence of that person, that they're there. It's like they can hold it. Yeah, they can hold it. And I think there is an analogy, we could say, between what might happen in a helpful therapeutic process and what might happen as we practice meditation. In that there's a sense that there's all the pain and the distress and the sorrow, and it can be held. Yeah, and at first, that in that relationship, the counselor is holding that, but then over time, perhaps the person realizes actually they can find that resource in themselves as well. Yeah, and so too in meditation, there are times when we are both the one who is suffering and the one who can hold that. Yeah, both the one who's suffering and the one who can hold that. So we can feel what's hard, what's difficult, what's painful. And there's a sense, and we can breathe with that. We can be with that. We can find steadiness with it. It can be met. Sometimes, again, what happens to us when we cry, I think, can be a clue to this. Very often there can be a time, if you imagine before there are tears, when there's more the feeling of irritability, or, there's a bit of a feeling there's something not quite right, but you feel kind of irritable, a bit cut off, a bit, not quite all right. And then actually through finding some tears or settling into tears sounds the wrong word, but it's like there's more getting in touch with what's underneath that snappiness, irritability. And yes, there may be tears, but that's also a relief. So the connection is something that is liberating for us. Yeah, connecting with the sadness, really connecting with it, is freeing. And so just to finish this first talk this morning, compassion has so many different directions or fields or areas it can reach. So, there is a whole literature now on self-compassion. And much of what I'm saying, particularly this morning, I will really draw on some of these writings of people like Paul Gilbert and Kristin Neff. and others on self-compassion. That shift from a more harsh or judgmental attitude to ourselves to a more kind and caring way of being with our own experience. Yeah? We can also see compassion as operating in widening circles of concern. So it can take in, not just ourselves, but our friends, our neighbors, our family, people that we work with, people in our local community, people more widely, and can become a sense of all humanity, and really then opening up beyond that to include animals, to include other species. Opening up more widely, it can include animals and people who are yet to be born. We can feel compassion for future generations. We could also say, we could feel compassion for the earth itself, for life itself. So there's this, widening sense of what compassion can mean. And, in the Buddhist tradition, this is always very much related to this contemplation of interconnection. So that sense of a widening circle of concern isn't coming from a sort of abstract sense of duty. I really ought to care about others. Somebody's told me it's a good idea to care about others, but more from a realization of our connection and interdependence. So again, this image is like I don't have to tell my right hand not to attack my left arm, because there's somehow a sense, well, actually it's all part of the same body. Yeah. So again, there can be these shifts of perspective, shifts of perception, as we conceive ourselves as not just these individual separate identities, but profoundly connected with the people and the animals and the world around us. I sure talk more about that later on, but maybe just as a starting point, I don't know if you've had breakfast today. That can always be a good place to start this contemplation of interconnection, if you were to begin to trace back where that came from. Don't know, if say you had toast, where did that wheat come from the toast? What was that environment like? Who was working to bring that to you? About the people in there, who are involved in delivering that to you. The sunshine that was there for the crops, the rain that fell on the crops, all the countless generations who've passed on how to make bread, the kind of traditions there.